Welcome to Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant podcast. These are the stories of those who have received, given, and who are waiting for the gift of life, organ transplantation. Now here's your host and heart and kidney recipient, BJ Odom.
Welcome to the Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant podcast, where we explore the extraordinary world of organ transplantation. I'm your host, BJ Odom. Each week we share inspiring stories and introduce you to remarkable individuals sharing their own transplant stories. Be sure to support the podcast by leaving that 5-star review and subscribing on your preferred podcast platform. Have a transplant story yourself or like to comment about something you hear on today's show? Love to hear from you. The email address, giftoflifepodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's giftoflifepodcast@gmail.com. Plus, we would love to hear your story if you do have a transplant story to share. And don't forget to connect with us on Facebook, Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant Podcast, as we welcome you to episode 74. In this episode, we introduce you to Sean Pinegar, a heart transplant survivor living with LMNA. His journey is powerful, filled with struggle, resilience, and gratitude. But there's a twist. Sean's heart just didn't get replaced. It found a new purpose that may one day help others. Join us for a story of hope, healing, and the gift of life. We'll talk to Sean Pinegar next. So we have Sean Pinegar on with us today. So excited to hear his story. But first of all, Sean, why don't you start out by telling us just a little bit about yourself?
So Sean, a 39-year-old guy. A few years ago, actually about 2 years ago, I learned I have a rare genetic caused cardiomyopathy. It's a LMNA-related or like a mutation of the LMNA gene. It's been kind of an accelerated progression with me that's within 2 years of being diagnosed resulted in a heart transplant. I'm of the 14th of this month, 1 year post transplant. Everything's been great, and happy to talk about that some more. Personally, a family guy. I have a wife, young boys. We have a dog. Everybody's happy. I'm located in Omaha, Nebraska, and then professionally, I've always I've been in the tech space for a long time. So I naturally have obsessed over the genetic cause for my cardiomyopathy and conduction disorder, and have found myself very embedded within the ecosystem over the last couple of years.
Oh, cool. I mean, it's not cool, but to hear your story and the way you're involved is very, very positive and interesting. So basically, you said it kind of started out just a few years ago. So let's begin at the beginning on your journey.
Yeah. So if I go back a little over 2 years at this point, I've been doing martial arts for most of my adult life. I got started when I was about 21, which was a little late, but I've just loved it. Doing a mix of kickboxing, jiu-jitsu, Kali, Panatukan, etc. And one particular day I was at jiu-jitsu, and I was working out pretty hard with one of my friends at the gym, and then his children showed up, and they're young, 12 at the oldest of his children. And I said, "Hey, I'll take a break and I'll teach your kids for a little while." So I start walking them through some real basic moves, and I start to get really uncomfortable really quick in a situation which I'm not usually uncomfortable. I've been doing this for 19 years at this point. So it was unusual to feel uncomfortable. So I said, "Hey, give me a moment. I'm going to take a minute, catch my breath." And, unfortunately, or I guess fortunately, since I do jujitsu, I know what it feels like to start to pass out, because that's just part of the game, and that's usually when you would tap and say, you got me, so to speak. And I looked around the room briefly, and I said, "Hey, I'm about to pass out." And the next thing I know, I come to, people are saying my name, someone's rubbing my back. And I thought I was having a panic attack suddenly because my heart was beating like I've never felt it beat in my life. I sat there for a few minutes thinking, just telling everybody, "Hey, just let me catch my breath. Just let me catch my breath. I'm having a little bit of a panic attack." And I just found myself in a spot where I couldn't sit up. I had no strength. I couldn't even crawl over to my bag to pick my phone up. One of the members of the gym, he actually took his Apple Watch, he put it on my wrist, and then he ran the ECG function. And after doing it a couple of times, he said, "Oh man, this thing must be broke," and he put it down. Ultimately, I had my wife come pick me up. I just did not have the strength to get anywhere. A couple people carried me out to her car, and she'd made the right decision and said, "Hey, Sean, we just need to go straight to the emergency room." I went there, and things got real fast. I saw the attending, I'm assuming a nurse or a tech, someone that does the initial assessment of why are you here. They hooked up their EKG, and they asked me if I could sit back in the wheelchair, which I did. And then she started walking very fast, yelling very loud, and that's how I knew something wasn't right. I ultimately went back to a room where there was about a dozen doctors waiting for me, one of which who made sure to let me know that I was the most interesting person in the hospital at that moment. And my wife was right behind me, and next thing I know, they're asking me if I've ever had surgery, ever been put under, because they needed to cardiovert me as I was in VT, and my heart was going about 300 beats a minute.
Oh, wow.
Somehow they basically say, because I was so accustomed to working out really hard, that somehow my body managed to I managed to not stay passed out, even though my heart rate was that high. In that moment, it was interesting. I've been into cryptocurrency for quite a while, so I started yelling at my wife all this instructions around Bitcoin. I probably seemed insane, but there was a lot of people around me barking a lot of orders around what they were going to do to save my life, if this or that, or however it played out. They were going through all the if-thens, if you will. Ultimately, they cardioverted me. That worked. I stayed overnight, and then they let me know. Unfortunately, the doctor did not have the best bedside manner. He looked right at me, said I have the heart of a 70-year-old, and that I would never do anything I enjoy ever again.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It was a little odd, but so I'm in the ICU. I'm staying the night, obviously, and my my mother happened to be recovering from a heart transplant at a nearby med center. So I called her and I was like, "Hey, you'll never guess where I'm at." And up to this point, I never knew there was potentially anything wrong with me. And I explained it to her. She happened to have someone from her care team nearby. So they took the phone. They asked me how old I was and what happened. I said, I'm 37 and I had VT. And they said, "Hey, Sean, we know what's going on. You need to get down here and see us." So I was hooked up with a life vest, sent on my way. And then I went down to, I transferred my care over to the University of Nebraska Medical Center, where I see an excellent team there. And they quickly got to the bottom of things and identified that I have an LMNA variant that led to a layman cardiomyopathy with conduction disorder. So that's like the first chunk of it. And then naturally, they wanted to conduct an MRI, and there was about a 3-month wait. I found this life vest to be the most miserable thing ever if you go outside and start to sweat.
Now, if you would,
yeah.
Because now I know a lot of people, that experience, your complications, they'll put in like a defibrillator and the defibrillator also kind of like a pacemaker. So what is the life vest? If you know, because that's, I mean, it's not completely new, but for those that may not understand it, why don't you explain what we're talking about?
Yeah, so they felt pretty certain I would need an ICD. However, they wanted to conduct an MRI, a cardiac MRI, to really understand what was going on with my heart before they put it in, because that could lead to what type of ICD you put in. Is it a single lead? Is it a dual lead? Is it CRTD? One that does this 3 leads and synchronizes the heart. So to bridge me, so basically as a little bit of a life insurance policy, if you will, to bridge me to the ICD and ensure I didn't die of sudden cardiac death due to arrhythmias, like what put me in the hospital. They gave me a vest to wear that I had to wear all the time, except when I take a shower, and it took to a battery pack that I'd wear. And all it's really doing is monitoring my heart rhythms. And if it were to detect that I was in a life-threatening rhythm, like VT, then it'd function as an external defibrillator and shock my heart back into a good rhythm. So I ultimately wore that again as a bridge. I did have a cardiac MRI. There was initially a 3-month wait. A relative of mine mentioned that our children's hospital does see adults too. And when I called them, they were able to get me in the same week for an MRI. So that's a little medical life hack that I picked up along the way. I had my MRI. They found quite a bit of scarring, and the EP that did that MRI ultimately contacted the med center. He had a very good relationship with them and said, Sean needs an ICD ASAP. And then ultimately they fitted me for a dual lead ICD. So it could function as a pacer as well. And which was good, because these new modern ICDs, they have ATP built in, which is anti-tachycardia pacing, to where opposed to just shocking you once it detects a bad rhythm, because you feel the shock, it can knock you down. It's not great. It's not a great experience. It will try to pace you, and it will use its own algorithm to adjust over the course of whatever the configured number of pacings are. Mine, it was like it would do 7 attempts at pacing before shock. So that leads up to me receiving an ICD, so that the life vest was wearing an external defibrillator, if you will, and then the ICD is the implant, or the internal one that goes in you. That's going to be much more accurate, but it achieves the same outcome of saving your life.
So now you've got the implant. Now, when did they actually tell you or decide, or did you already know by this time you were going to need a heart transplant?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one of the things I've learned throughout my journey in getting close to being more embedded in the ecosystem is it's natural to want to compare to other people in similar circumstances or with similar diseases. And it's something you just should not do. In my example, I compared myself to my mother's trajectory. As I mentioned, she was recovering from a heart transplant when this all happened, and she was in her late 50s. So the way I looked at it was, I should have till my late 50s. I've got 20 years before I have to worry about that. And honestly, my care team felt very similar. My heart failure doctor said, hey, Sean, like the actual progression of heart failure, like you're pretty good. My ejection fraction was 45 to 50, so it wasn't terribly low, it wasn't terribly dilated. My runs of VT were becoming pretty minimal. Naturally, they told me, Sean, you got to stop jujitsu, don't do running, all that stuff, keep your heart rate down. But it was good. I had, for that first year, like zero, almost no pacing or anything. Like I had some light pacing, but nothing because I was in a bad rhythm. Now, again, during that time, so again, teams all communicating, yes, Sean, you're going to get worse, but it's going to be over a long period of time. And we actually think you won't ever need a heart transplant. And I was like, okay, great. And then, unfortunately, about a year after I'd received my ICD, so from a timing perspective, like when it happened the first year, it was bad timing because it was also the week of one of my kids' birthdays, and we'd like moved the whole birthday. It was unfortunate. I fast forward, I'm helping coach my son's flag football team, and it's honestly, in hindsight, a right place, right time type of situation. So I'm coaching a team. It's a practice, but there's other parents there, so all eyes are on me as I help coach. And then I feel something in my chest shaking pretty violently, and I'm thinking my ICD must be doing that ATP thing where it paces me out. I remember seeing a kind of a twinge just through my eyesight, a little twinge in the air, and I was like, I wonder if I'm about to be shocked. I should probably sit down in case. And before I could react, it hit me, knocked me down. One of the parents there happened to be a medic. So he comes running over, and it shocked me again. And, the general rule is if it shocks you once, tell your team, just inform them. If it shocks you more than once or twice, as an example, then you should go to the ER. Well, the local fire and rescue happened to be conducting a training that day. It was about 1 minute from where I was at, and it was everybody on deck. So everybody showed up to this football field where they thought it's with heart issues, everybody assumes it's a heart attack. Mm-hmm. And it's like, if you're like under 50 and you're experiencing a heart issue, it's rare that it's a heart attack. If anything, it's more close to cardiac arrest. But they show up. One of the parents says, "Hey, we'll watch your son." I called my family. They came to get my son and what have you. And then they ultimately just kind of rushed me down to the med center. And that's where I stayed for quite a while.
Okay. So right about here is where you're going to hear the words, "We need to get you on the list," probably. Am I ahead of myself, or are we at the right time?
We're almost there. So again, it kind of going back to the earlier question, I was comparing against what I saw in my mother. I was comparing against what I'd learned throughout the ecosystem and being very involved. Before this hospital stay that I'm about to get into, again, I obsess over what puts me at ease is knowing everything possible about the situation I'm in. That way I can determine what can I control and how can I influence it and what can I not control. And through that, I met this team at LMNA Cardiac. They're based out of the Netherlands. One of their founders is arguably the leading researcher globally on the disease that led to my cardiac issues. And I became a part of their organization and still help them to this day in many, many capacities. Now, going back to the hospital, I arrived. They started slamming amiodarone in me, along with a couple of other anti-arrhythmia medications. I was, in that first week, they reached the conclusion of, "Hey, Sean," they came to me and said, "Hey, we think we may be able to ablate this." So I did a ventricle ablation, which I know people that get AFib, and they will talk about how they received an ablation, and they say it just so like, "Yeah, I had an ablation." And I do know, because I asked my doctor about this later, like that is different than when you go in for an ablation for something like VT. So when I got my ablation, it was an 8-hour procedure where I was not on, they really couldn't make me comfortable throughout the procedure. It's a thing where you just can't move. You have to lay perfectly still. There's no pain medication, anything like that. They can't knock me out, because if they do any of that, it can prevent the VT from occurring that they're trying to fix. So then they go up the groin, they spend a few hours mapping my heart internally, and then they start the process of using they start the process of racing my heart. So they get it up to about 200 beats a minute. That way they can get the VT going. They trigger the VT, and then they spend the rest of their time burning scar. They're creating scar, so burning the inside of my heart to try and ablate away the VT, which is basically finding the point at which VT is occurring, scarring around it so that these electrical signals can't, in theory, cause any more issues. It was the most miserable thing I've ever gone through. I was awake for 5 hours of it before they finally said, all right, he's far enough along, we can sedate him and put him under.
Wow.
It was miserable.
Now they couldn't use Versed or anything, huh? You were like completely awake during the whole thing, or were they able to give you? Because I had an ablation probably 4 or 5 years ago with the transplanted heart, and here in another couple months, because I'm getting all out of whack again, they're planning another one. But like you say, it's just the regular everyday ablation, and nothing sounds like you went through.
I don't know what a regular everyday ablation looks like, but I was, just by how people have spoken about it with AFib, I just realized there's a difference here. Like, mine was very traumatic. And when I talk about it, I'm not just like, oh yeah, I had an ablation. I'm like, I had an ablation and it was miserable. There's just differences I can tell in how people talk about it. So I asked my doctor, and he did explain that there's very different techniques used. But in my case, since it was a life-threatening thing, they couldn't leave any room for error. So they had to do no sedation to ensure that they were able to ablate where this was occurring in the heart.
Well,
we get done.
For myself, if I'm going to have a heart cath or I'm going to have an ablation, the main reason I do it is so I can get the sedation while they're doing it. Because I always ask, who's the bartender in this room? Because I know as soon as they see the doctor's eyes, they can, give me a little happy juice. But until they see the whites of his eyes, I say, can I get a little cocktail early? Oh, no, not until the doctor gets here.
Yeah, no, I know. The anesthesiologist was great. She was doing everything she could to comfort me, besides give me something to comfort me. So a lot of just conversation to kind of keep me distracted. And at one point, I looked over at her and I had tears in my eyes, and I was just in so much pain as they were getting really intense with the burning. And she was pleading with the doctor, and he just said, "Nope, not yet." It was like, I get it. At the same time, I was like, I just never want to do this again.
Oh yeah. Now I don't even want to do my regular ablation after. No, I'm just kidding.
I feel you. We thought it was good. I was in the hospital for a few days, and their whole thing was they wanted to see a few days straight with no more runs of VT occurring. And we got there, and it was great. I went home. And I was home for 3 days. On the third day, I was getting ready for therapy, and I walked up my stairs, and I was sitting there just getting ready, and all of a sudden I'm like, my heart's not racing 300 beats a minute, but I can feel it, and it's beating more than it should. So I asked my wife, I'm like, hey, can you calm me down? I don't know if I'm just nervous to talk about this or what have you. And then ultimately, I said, hey, I think I need to go to an emergency room, and something just doesn't feel right. Now we went to the closest emergency room, which happens to be the only hospital in my city that does not have a cardiologist on staff. So they had no idea what to do with me. And eventually I checked myself out against doctor's orders, and I went down to the med center. And on my drive down there, the attending doctor in the emergency room called me on his cell phone to tell me that he would have made the same decision. And honestly, I don't think I ever received a bill for that visit, because they knew that I did the right thing. There was literally nothing they could do for me. So then I head back down to the med center. I walk in, and at this point I'm in slow VT. So my heart's beating maybe 140 beats a minute, anywhere from 120 to 140, but it's technically VT. So I go in, I say, hey, I'm in slow VT. They take me back, they confirm it, and they start pumping more amiodarone in me and another medicine. And at this stage, I was in just kind of recurring VT storms, albeit slow VT. At one point, I was in VT for maybe 23 hours straight during my visit, but it was getting bad enough that they kept me in cardiac ICU, which was confusing to the staff because I was playing board games with my family. It's just no other floor knew what to do with me because they weren't accustomed to someone continuing to be in these VT rhythms. And I was basically living on IVs at this stage. Anytime they tried to take me off, I went right back into VT. And they quickly progressed, and it got to the point that if I raised my arm, I'd go into VT. If I'd move my leg, I'd go into VT. I was in VT so much that the staff were told, his alarms are going to go off. Don't worry about it. So I'd have the super loud, red alert thing going off. They just turn it off. And it is scary, but I found it a little humorous at the time as well. But I also didn't realize how close I was to like that being it for me. I learned a lot of this after the fact from my wife and friends. And there were some moments where they had to hit rapid response to help deal with my heart rhythms and stuff like that. But we went through a couple of weeks of them trying to figure out, could they avoid a transplant? Then eventually a large team comes in. I noticed the EP team is not with them. The EP team had given up on me at that point. And they said, hey, Sean, we have a couple of options. We can try to ablate again, or we can look at advanced therapies. And advanced therapies is what they keep calling transplants this whole time I'm down there.
Okay.
And I knew the first ablation, the success rate for the cardiac issues I have, the LMNA cardiomyopathies, the success rate is low. So I asked them, what's the success rate of a second one? And they said, much, much lower. It's like, okay, so I got 3 days on the first one. I'm not feeling good about the second. So I looked right at them and I said, so we're talking transplant. And they basically nodded. And at that point, I was so mentally and physically exhausted from being in VT constantly that I was just like, cool, like, how do we kick off this process, get this thing out of me?
That, you know what? That's kind of like, I don't know. I don't know if you know much about my story, but I basically have been sick as a child. And so I know when they did say the transplant word to me, I was kind of like you, let's get the show on the road and let's make this happen, where, my wife and family was a little like, well, you sure? Let's think about this. But yeah, I was full on board. Let's do it.
Yeah. I think at this stage, my family was supportive. They'd all spent enough time with me in the hospital and saw, large teams constantly going in and out. They got to hear the worried conversations outside that they didn't share with me because they didn't want me to realize how close I was to just not being here anymore. That they were all just kind of mentally prepared, and they were all ready for transplant at this stage.
Awesome.
As was I, obviously.
So then how long, because you were in this state, how long were you on the list, and did you stay in the hospital to keep you kind of on top of the list, or how did everything go then?
Yeah. So in my case, I could not leave the hospital. There was a few medications in particular, again, amiodarone included, that were keeping me alive, and even trying to get me off IV form and onto taking pills was not cutting it. So I could not leave. I was alive due to IVs at this stage. Now, I went through a 3-day assessment process, passed, they put me on the list, and 2 days later, they matched me and I received a new heart.
Oh, awesome. That, at least that's part of your story that's good news then. That was awesome.
Yeah, I didn't realize how unusual it is to receive it within 2 days until I haven't met anybody that's received one quicker.
I got mine pretty quick, but as I said, I was sick as a child. And so I never really realized I was sick as I was. And they actually told me, of course, this is all about your story, but they told me when they did take out the old heart to put in the new, and they looked at the old heart, they actually, of course, they always tell you these things after, but we looked at that heart and we said, how this man's alive, we will never, ever know. Because they said it was just one big blob of mush, basically.
Wow. That's wild. I think, with this disease, there's, I think, a couple ways it tends to play out in terms of transplant. One is a story like mine, where the occurrences of ET or VF are so frequent or so severe that it's the conduction issues that lead to an urgent transplant. But there's also the other side of it, which I think might be more common, and that's a traditional heart failure route where the function of the heart just decreases so significantly over time that leads to a transplant. And hearing those stories, similar to yours, where it's, a decade of being sick, spending a lot of time in the hospital, etc., I feel like I got the better deal, where mine was just a sudden boom, Sean, you're sick, and get the new heart.
Yeah. Well, now I'm going to kind of open this up to you, because we talked a little bit before we started the podcast, and I know you're working with an organization. So if you kind of would just, in your words and what you want to say, because, I know this is kind of a sticky topic for some people, but explain what you're doing now and how you're trying to help more people that is, in your circumstances and even down the road. If you, whatever you can tell me, I'm willing to let you have a platform here.
Yeah. So there's a couple of organizations that I've grown, I have a relationship with. One is the DCM Foundation, who covers dilated cardiomyopathy as a larger subject. Greg Ruff, he's their president. We're really good friends. We talk every other day. And then the other is LMNA-Cardiac, which is a nonprofit based out of the Netherlands that was founded by two patients. One is an entrepreneur, it ran on his family, etc. And then the other is a patient. He's had his heart transplant, and he since has gone on to become the world's leading cardiac researcher for the disease. And he works for Maastricht University out in the Netherlands. His name is Roger Veltrop. And he's one of those people that you can get on with calls, that people that know this disease, like the experts in the medical field. And he's like the Michael Jordan when he joins the call. It's really fascinating. So I work with them, not as much on the research side. He has his team and he handles all that. Mine's more patient side. So the first thing I did was I was trying to learn as much as possible when I was diagnosed, and I found that I had to go to a lot of different places. And when I found LMNA-Cardiac, I saw their website and I was like, oh boy, I don't know how effective this group is at communicating to patients, making them aware of lifestyle changes, all that stuff. So before I even joined their organization, I had some downtime due to my health issues, and I have a background in tech. So I spent some time building out a new website to cover all these different topics that I was searching for answers for when I was first diagnosed. And then I gifted them a website. That's when they asked me to join the team. After that, I deployed an AI chatbot on the website. Again, just another area in tech that I have a background. And it's trained on all the latest and greatest material around the disease. So patients can go there and ask some questions. We even see physicians go ask some questions there. So it's been really helpful. And then since then, have been helping them build out a broader team and then work on stronger, partnerships and patient engagement throughout the ecosystem. And really, one of our goals is, can we make a rare disease less rare? Because the less rare you make it, the more interest there is from biotech. So we do work with biotech organizations, and some of which that are working on therapies for the disease. So it served a couple purposes of me helping facilitate their mission, educate more patients, but also keeps me close to the industry that is working to solve the problem. Now, there's other ways to contribute as well, especially as a patient. And I chose to try and pull off something extra special when my transplant when I learned I was going to need a transplant. At one point, a team came to me and they were asking me to sign some waivers for a study they're doing on ways to transplant an organ, ways to transfer an organ from one facility to another. And while I was speaking with them, I probably sounded insane, but I said, hey, I know this scientist in the Netherlands. Can we send my heart to him to study it? And I'm sure they thought I was crazy. But I provided them, I added a bit more color, which probably showed I actually did know somebody. I shared his information. They had a conversation and they realized he is super legit. He actually has the world's largest biobank for this disease. And when I spoke with my team, the hill I was dying on effectively was, if you keep it at the med center, you will have my old heart. You will have this heart with a rare disease that you don't directly study. You see the patients, you know about it, you're very good at treating it and obviously good at transplants, but you're not studying the disease itself. I would like my heart to go to someone that is actually studying it and can help us with therapy development. I have a great team. They agreed with my sentiment, and a couple days later, they had all the verbal approvals, and then they just had to put the contracts in place, et cetera, throughout my transplant recovery. But we got it done. Now this team in the Netherlands, this Roger Veltrop I know, has physical samples of my heart, and it's tremendous because I feel like that's the type of donation that is very, very difficult to make or receive for researchers like Roger and patients like me.
And I don't know, maybe, I don't think either one of us can probably explain this, but I told you before, we started, doing the podcast today, because you were explaining this to me. And I said, I've already told my wife and even the people at Tampa General, whatever you need to take out when I am gone to study, feel more than free to do, because I don't know, maybe because we've went through all of this and we've had these experiences and we know how important research is, that, and we know how important organ donation is, when people, donate organs. So we're kind of at the point, once this body is gone and we're done, you do whatever you need to do to better the world after us. And I don't know where we get that mentality, but I think so many of us transplant patients have it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It gives you a whole new perspective. And, in my eyes, like that's the route to go. It's the mindset to have. But I also take it a step further and I think through with what they could learn from my body who is best served to receive those organs or those samples to help facilitate the best research. And that's why I was very insistent that samples of my heart be sent to the Netherlands to somebody that can use it to make a difference with this rare disease that I don't feel gets enough focus from universities, as an example. Now, the other thing you hit on, and it's honestly why I'm open to sharing my story more broadly. And one of my probably like the bad quality of mine is I'm not a huge fan of storytelling for storytelling's sake. I've met a lot of transplant patients that seem to be writing books about their story.
That's me. And in fact, it comes out the next month.
Yeah. I had several given to me throughout the process, and it's like they resonate for a little bit until they don't, because it starts to get very specific to that person, and then it's harder for me to connect with it. But that's me. But I do it because I think it's very important to highlight a few things. One is being involved in communities that can help facilitate focus on the disease that led to your transplant. With cardiomyopathies in particular, it's estimated that 50% of them are genetic in nature, but only about 1% of people get tested. So that leaves a huge gap in terms of number of people that understand, number of people that have confirmed diagnosis, and ultimately that translates to the focus from biotech or not on where they should invest their dollars to cure a disease. But the other thing is really around organ donation. If you are not an organ donor, I encourage you to consider it. And it's just, in my own experience, my biggest fundamental mind shift in organ donation is it's not one life that's being saved. There's multiple organs that will save multiple people. I received a heart from my donor. Someone else may have received their lungs or their kidneys or their liver, etc. But it even goes further than that. You're saving a father or a mother's son or daughter. You're saving a sibling's sibling. You're saving a wife's husband or a husband's wife. You're saving a spouse. You're saving a child's parent. You're saving the livelihood of multiple generations through just the greatest gift you can ever give. And that cannot go understated enough. And I just really want to encourage people to consider being an organ donor.
Amen to that. And I'll tell you this, and I've told this story many a times on the podcast, but it is so to real life. And of course, nowadays I had my transplant 23 years ago. And when people found out, to many, it was new. It was something, oh my God, you did. And now, we're 23 years later and more people at least have heard of organ donation and more people are aware of someone who has a transplanted organ, but it's still not well enough. But I had a young man on the podcast with a liver. And of course, unfortunately, a couple of years before he got his liver or needed a liver transplant, his wife had passed away and he was in that room, with the folks that were, trying to procure organs. And he flat out said, no way, no how, get out now. And then fast forward a couple years later, he needs an organ transplant. He receives the organ transplant. He's doing so much better in life now and enjoying, children and grandchildren, like, you say, and brothers and sisters. But he said if he could just somehow go back in time and have that moment to relive all over again, he would have changed his mind 1,000%.
Yeah, I mean, I can see why, and I think it's unfortunate that there's been some pieces in the media recently that create hesitation in people to become an organ donor because of a situation that rarely happens around starting to cut into somebody that may not actually be brain dead yet. It's incredibly, incredibly rare. I think it's overblown. It's doing a huge disservice to the greatest gift somebody can ever provide another person.
Well, I'll tell you what, Sean, I appreciate so much for you coming on. And as I always close out every podcast, because, you're telling your story in your way. And what I really want to do here the last few minutes is open up, communications and, give you the time. If there's anything we missed, anything you want to talk about, I'm going to give you the opportunity here as we get ready to close out the podcast.
Yeah. I'd love to share. A frequent question I get is, Sean, what have you learned through this process? And I think there's stuff in here that's relevant to everyday folk as well as transplant folk. And, the first is that I think people would be amazed how much their network cares and how big their network is when they're going through something as significant as receiving an organ transplant. If you ever have to go through this process, people will reach out from all over. They will offer to cook. They will offer to clean. Just embrace it, because it is one of the greatest feelings you will ever have to realize people care so much. The other thing that I've learned through this is to be a lot more mindful of time spent. And what I mean by that is I focus my time on things that I think are worth my time and high value, personally and professionally, and more present than I ever had been. When I laid in the hospital, I wasn't concerned about, will people remember that great thing I did at work? It was the moments I either had with my children or the moments I still wanted to have. So personally, professionally, if something's not a good use of my time, I don't do it, or I find somebody else that will. There's a couple more things to hit on here. And I hope patients take away, people that have been through this, and you may relate to this, that there's like this idea I have in my head now of how to anchor my difficulties in previous experiences to help me to work through difficult or hard times. And the single moment I've lived that was the hardest thing I ever done was not the transplant. It was not recovering from the transplant. It was laying in a hospital thinking I might not make it and recording videos singing happy birthday. So if I didn't make it, my kids could watch that on their birthday. Nothing will ever compare to that difficulty. So when something now difficult or hard comes up, I anchor it in how does it compare to that moment? And that instantly takes weight off my shoulder. And I just realize I can get through anything. So for you that have gone through transplants, I imagine you have similar moments. I would encourage you to use that mentality, because I have found it to be just so incredibly helpful.
So, young man, you need to write a book. Because you've got some great words of wisdom, and I have so much appreciated you being on the podcast.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on the podcast. It's great to be able to share a story and more importantly advocate for organ donation.
Thank you, Sean, for sharing your story with all the audience today. We so much appreciate it. And be sure to join us each week for a new Heartfelt episode. And if you have a transplant story, please email us and share your story. giftoflifepodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's giftoflifepodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook. Also, don't forget to like and share this episode with family and friends. And we always appreciate that 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Another podcast you might enjoy with myself and my former radio partner for many years, Bill Stevens. BJ and Bill, the podcast, all on the Podcast Playground Network. And we want to thank them so much for making this podcast possible. Until next time, I'm BJ Odom. Thank you for being a part of our journey and reminding us all to appreciate each and every day and to treasure the extraordinary gift of life.
He was running on empty, heart fading fast. Doctor said, man, you ain't gonna last. But a stranger's kindness, a gift so true, turned the night sky into something new. He got a second chance, he got a brand new spark. Like a freight train rolling back from the dark. Gift of life, let the story be told. One heart beats, another takes hold. Give a little, save a soul. Ain't no greater rock and roll. 15 years later, the road got rough. The fight ain't over when the climb is tough. Needed a kidney, the race was on. Another hero stepped up, kept him strong. Every breath he takes is a tale of hope. One life saved, another can cope. Gift of life, let the story be told. One heart beats, another takes hold. Give a little, save a soul. Ain't no greater rock and roll. Doctor's hands, a donor's grace, running on down to a brand new place. Second chances don't come twice, but when they do, man, they feel so nice. So let's spread the word, let the people know. One yesterday lets a miracle grow. You don't need wings just to save a man, just a little love, a helping hand. Gift of life, let the story be told. One heart beats, another takes hold. Give a little, save a soul. Ain't no greater rock and roll. BJ still rocking, still standing tall, thanks to the ones who gave it all. Gift of life, hear the sound. Pass it on, pass it down. The Gift of Life podcast, hosted by BJ Odom. Listen now.